Namaste. Good morning to all of you. Dr. Srinivas Kumar Acharya, today's distinguished speaker of this webinar series. Dr. Geetesh Nirban, co-convener of the webinar series. Distinguished invitees and participants and dear friends who are interested in Mahabharata scholarship. I welcome you all to this 22nd session of this series of webinars on Mahabharata as hosted by the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi and Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi. These webinars are being organized under the aegis of a SPARK project, which is a scheme for promotion of academic and research collaboration, an initiative of Ministry of Education, Government of India. The title of the project is Yoga Consciousness in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, an ethical value for societal and political well-being. We are working as a team for this project with Professor Vishwa Adluri from Hunter College, City University of New York, USA, as our international principal investigator, Dr. Joydeep Bagchi from Germany, who is associated with Hindu University of America as co-principal investigator from international side, and Dr. Geetesh Nirban from Department of Philosophy, Kamala Nehru College as the Indian co-principal investigator, and me, Professor Bala, the head of the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi as the Indian principal investigator. Our extended team consists of Ms. Jayashree Jha, Ms. Anmolpreet Kaur, Megha Kapoor, who are the research scholars at the University of Delhi Department of Philosophy, working on various aspects of Mahabharata, and Ms. Deepshika, who is a postgraduate student, is also helping us in this project. As far as our project is concerned, it is our collaborative attempt to revisit the Indian epic to explore yoga consciousness as one of its underlying messages while understanding how dharma as a result of yoga consciousness in Mahabharata can well be interpreted for political and societal well-being. This project is a journey through the roadmap of yoga consciousness to delve deeper into ancient Indian wisdom for revisiting the concepts of social responsibility and value embeddedness. It is also, the project also tries to look for answers to the question of right action, thus portraying how yoga consciousness in the form of equanimity and equality in Mahabharata emerges as an ethical ideal. Well, these series of webinars are our humble attempt to make the various aspects of Mahabharata reach the diverse audience who hold interest in the study of the epic. We started this series of webinars during the extreme phase of lockdown to engage the minds with Mahabharata. We have had the privilege of hosting scholars of repute from various universities and organizations in India and abroad, wherein diverse topics related to Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita have been touched, ranging from social and political well-being, ethical dilemmas, justice, consciousness, karma yoga, and instrumental violence, environmental influences, dialogical consciousness, and many more topics pertaining to the epic. All is an attempt to explore Mahabharata from the human well-being. Today, we are honored to have a young scholar with us, Dr. Srinivas Kumar Acharya, who is associated with the Department of Philosophy, uh, Manipal Academy of Higher Education. Sorry, I'm getting university, so I wanted to correct myself. Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal. He is going to speak today on Mahabharata in the age of digital humanities. This is very important for us in this project, especially, and also for the audience who are with us, because there were questions previously, I remember, that were raised by our participants saying, which text should we follow? And how do we understand the text? How do we read the text? Mahabharata, we have understood, is not a text in that particular sense, like limiting it to a particular book. It is a tradition. And in fact, it is not a tradition, it is you have to call Mahabharata traditions, no, in plural, because we have textual tradition, and we also have performing traditions of Mahabharata in India. Textual tradition, not tradition, in fact, textual traditions of Mahabharata and performing traditions of Mahabharata. In this context, I am reminded of a statement that a distinction that Professor Raghuram Raju has made in the recent webinar at Kamala Nehru College, which was hosted by Dr. Gitesh Nirban again, where he talks about two important movements in Indian tradition. One is text tradition, text movement, and the second one is textbook movement. Text movement was initiated in the classical India, and it influenced generations of people. And textbook tradition is what has come out because of this English academia teaching that we are doing through the universities. And these two are very important. In fact, I would add something saying that the text tradition of classical India is also a textbook tradition for the generations to come, generations which existed during that time. Having said that, this textual tradition is not just limited to Sanskrit alone. Why I am saying this text tradition also as in plural as textual traditions, because we have texts of Mahabharata in Sanskrit, and also we have translations of Mahabharata into various regional languages. It is not that these texts were translated; they were translated as it is available in the Sanskrit Vyasa Mahabharata. In fact, what you find is a kind of transcreation into various Indian languages and various Indian cultures, because Indian culture, though we use one word, it is always plural Indian cultures. So, for instance, some translation from northern part of the India may have a variation, and southern part of a translation from transcreation from southern part of India may have a different kind of narrative and different kind of interpolations and also changes that have come into existence. So this shows the richness of the textual tradition that we have, and along with that, as we have discussed previously, and we have been stressing this point that the performing traditions, richness of performing traditions throughout the length and breadth of India varies. You have traditional village performances where 21 days performance of Mahabharata happens in some of the rural traditions of India, which is very rich. And also you have modern adaptations of it into theater, where again you have different forms of Mahabharata narrative or different forms of performing traditions of Mahabharata that are available. So all these are text to the modern reader. A performance is a text, a book is a text, and how do we look at them and how do we read them, how do we understand them, is always a question to a person who inquisitively looks at this rich variety of tradition that is available and to explore into that. And that is where the question of how these various traditions are looked at is very important. In the modern day, modern scholarship, what happened is how people have looked at this tradition, rich tradition that is existent, and also how they have understood and interpreted is very important, and how they have reformulated it for us so that we can continue reading and getting into the tradition. And in this regard, the contemporary scholarship of Mahabharata is very important. Again, it is rich and diverse in the sense that you have Indian variations of Mahabharata scholarship, contemporary Mahabharata scholarship, and non-Indian variations of Mahabharata scholarship. And when it comes to the Indian variations of Mahabharata scholarship, one of the some of the texts which are very fundamental and basic, which you cannot avoid reading. No, if you want to claim yourself to be a Mahabharata scholar, you have to go to these texts, and these are one of them being Bhandarkar Research Institute's Mahabharata, critical edition of Mahabharata, and from South India, Vavilda Ramaswamy Shastri's version of it, and also from Kumbakonam, T.R. Krishnamacharya's version of it. These are very important texts which which people looked at and try to understand. But these are the texts which are available. How are these, like modern scholarship, modern knowledge, modern developments in the knowledge have advanced so much that they make use of the latest skills that have come up in terms of linguistics, in terms of technology. So how do we use these modern technological developments and the knowledge developments and look back at our tradition is very important. And in this particular regard, right, looking at digital humanities, the conception of digital humanities kind of things have come into existence. And in this particular regard, the work that Dr. Srinivas Acharya has done by being a part of this great project that Manipal Academy of Higher Education has taken up in with the title Computational Analysis of Mahabharata is very important. The latest knowledge developments, how did they approach the text and how they have used the modern technological advancements in reading the text and in facilitating the reading of the text for the modern reader is very important to know. And I am very sure the experience of organizing or conducting this project by Srinivas Acharya would help us how to look at the tradition through the modern lenses that we have evolved. So I really look forward. I welcome Dr. Srinivas Acharya to enlighten us about the project and how they have looked at this text and how the latest developments in the way of looking at the text have come up. And this is really going to be an eye opener to most of us. And with these words, I invite Dr. Geetesh to formally introduce Dr. Srinivas Acharya. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bala. Welcome you all to the Spark webinar series after a break of 2 weeks. And here we are right before you. Our esteemed scholar and the speaker for the day, Dr. Bala has already introduced. He's Dr. Srinivasa Kumara N. Acharya. He's an assistant professor and heads the Department of Philosophy at Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal, where he oversees an interdisciplinary research project, Mahe Mahabharat, the digital concordance and grammatical analysis using Sanskrit, computational linguistics, and he has organized Manipal Mahabharat lecture series in collaboration with eminent scholars. He's also doing our kind of work in a way. His areas of academic interest lie in Indian discourse on ethics and epistemology. He actively coordinates the publication initiatives at Manipal University Press and has been instrumental in bringing out scholarly translations and publications on Indian philosophy and literature. He completed 15 years of study in Indian philosophy and Sanskrit studies in Purna Pragya Vidyapeeth, Bengaluru, and is trained in Navya Nyaya and Dvaita Vedanta under the tutelage of Sri Vishveshwar Tirtha Swamiji. Further, he pursued his PhD in critical editing of Navya text, Mathur Ranatha Bhattacharya's Manya Loka Rahasya, under the guidance of Sri Vidya Shrish Tirth Swamiji, formerly known as D. Prahlad Char. We are so honored to have you amongst us, and kindly excuse me if I have gone a little wrong in pronunciation of the names of your esteemed mentors. So welcome you to our platform. Dr. Srinivas has been very kind to spare time for all of us to speak on the topic of great importance for our ongoing research project. Almost every aspect of this research project is now gone digital. So for us, this very address is of prime importance. I now invite and welcome once again Dr. Srinivasa. I now hand it over to him to deliver the address on Mahabharat in the age of digital humanities.
Thank you, Professor Balaganapati. Thank you, Dr. Geetesh Nirban, and thank you other international partners who are organizing this event. And also special thanks to Jay Shrija and Anmol Preet Kaur and others who are involved directly or indirectly in organizing such an, not this particular lecture, the whole event and the whole project itself. So it's really, really mesmerizing, and it's really wonderful achievement actually. आचार्यः पवनस्माकम् आचार्याणि च भारती देवो नारायण श्रीशः देवी मङ्गलदेवता तपस्वाध्याय शुश्रूषा कृष्णपूजारतं मुनिं विश्वेशमिष्टदं वन्दे परिव्राट् चक्रवर्तिनं योगो ज्ञानं तथा सांख्यं विद्याः शिल्पादिकर्म च वेदाः शास्त्राणि विज्ञानम् एतत् सर्वं जनार्दनात्. So the title is Mahabharata in the Age of Digital Humanities. The title was actually suggested by Dr. Geetesh Nirban over the phone conversation call, over the conversation. So we would be looking into three aspects of the topic. One is Mahabharata, one is, just a minute, I'll keep my timer on because I don't want to exceed my limit. Yeah. So what is Mahabharata? What is digital humanities, and what is the connection between these two? So, and how Manipal is engaging in such a connection. Before addressing what is Mahabharata, there are some of the things that we have to keep into mind is what is Mahabharata and which one is Mahabharata. And is there only one as Mahabharata or not? And again, this takes up the debate altogether to a series of questions and answers and discourses. And similarly, why Mahabharata? These are all something, some interesting, not observations or aspects, but they are interesting experiences to know them. What do I mean by that is, while I try to define Mahabharata, maybe we would be able to try to understand what Mahabharata really is. So Mahabharata is a Sahitya literature, Samskrita Sahitya, Sanskrit literature, Kavya Sahitya, a poetical literature, and is a Darshana. I would say Tattvajnana would be a better translation. There are a lot of translations for the word philosophy in some Indian languages and Sanskrit language, but given certain reasons and argumentations, I prefer to use the word Tattvajnana over others. But of course, Darshana is one of the most important idea or a concept itself in using the word equivalent to the word philosophy. Now, Darshana, so it's also a Darshana or a Tattvajnana. It's a philosophical literature. Undoubtedly, it's religious literature and the spiritual literature as well, but it doesn't limit itself to that. And it's a history, it's a documentary, it's also mythology. It contains almost many aspects of literary world, as it's the genres of the literary world. And further, the Mahabharata itself defines it as it is a Dharma Vijnana or Artha Vijnana or Kama Vijnana or Moksha Vijnana. In that sense, Mahabharata can also be seen as it is Trayi or Panchami, in the sense of it stands as a Veda itself. And it is also Anvikshiki, logic, epistemology. It is also Varta. Varta can mean, Varta means economics. It is also used in usage as news, but Varta means economics in Sanskrit. Also, when it comes to Vidyasthana, academic disciplines, Varta means economics. And also Niti, politics and sociology. People like Chanakya and all, they have used the word Dandaniti, and mostly the word is Dandaniti, but also we can use the word Niti. Now, it almost is like, when we say Dharma Vijnana, we also mean Dharma Alankara Vijnana. Along with it being a text of epistemology, it also stands as a text of ethics and aesthetics, a study a text that deals with both value theories or axiological domains. And it stands itself as a metaphysical study when it comes to religion, literature, philosophy. So it's also a work of ontology. How come a single work can play such a diverse role and deal with almost all concepts? Is it really possible? There is a statement which is also popular for a poet called Bana, Banochishtam Jagat Sarvam. Everything is what Bana has. I mean, Uchishta is a different word in Sanskrit. It's a little difficult to translate that into English because it sounds a little bit weird, but it means that everything Bana has already told. So whatever he said, that's what the world is all about. It is an expression, it's a hyperbolic expression about what Bana's contribution to the literary world is. Actually, interestingly, the Kadambari itself in Kannada, the Bana's written piece, Kadambari, became the title of the translation of the word novel. So that's Bana's contribution. That's why there is a phrase like Banochishtam Jagat. Similarly, there is also another phrase which is most widely used, Vyasochishtam Jagat Sarvam. Everything, the whole world is what Vyasa has already described. There is nothing that Vyasa has not described in Mahabharata. So for some people, it's a hyperbolic expression. It's a statement of exaggeration. But for some people, it's absolute reality. We will not get into the debate whether it's an absolute reality, a statement of reality, or statement of exaggeration. But of course, it's a very literary expression. It's a very beautiful expression. But Vedavyasa himself, in his text, says this. There was a lecture which was organized at Manipal, and then Professor Dr. H.V. Nagaraj Rao from Mysuru, is also a very well-known international figure, scholar. So he had said at the end of the lecture for a question that sometimes certain things are taken decontextually and then used in another sense. So it's very important for us to know in what sense it has been used. For example, Yadi hasti tadanyatra yanne hasti natat kvachit is a phrase, is a statement that Bana Vedavyasa himself in Adi Parva has told in Mahabharata. Yadi hasti tadanyatra, whatever is there in Mahabharata is there anywhere else. Yanne hasti natat kvachit. What is not there in Mahabharata is nowhere else. So we can stretch this phrase to our convenience when we are conducting the research. But Professor H.V. Nagaraj Rao had pointed that the context is the Purvarddha, the first half of the stanza, the verse. Dharmecha, Artecha, Kamecha, Mokshecha, Bharatarshabha, Idhi hasti tadanyatra yanne hasti natat kvachit. Dharme, on the topic of Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. Whatever is evident in Mahabharata is what anywhere else. Now, is it really possible for a poet, if we look at him as poet, but certain religious schools of thought also look at him a little different. Is it possible for a poet? There is a question whether Vedavyasa really exists. It's a similar question to what the Western scholars, literary scholars also ask the same to whether Homer really exists. Or is it a Homer, a name for multiples of bards or people who composed Homerian poems? So is it Vyasa a person, an individual, a single individual? So some claim Vyasa is a title, it's a padavi, it's a title for multiples of people who come and go and take a role in an activity. That is Veda Vyasa, systematization of Veda. Vyasa means systematizer, the one who systematizes. Vyasa, so it's all shattered, scattered. He puts them, he compiles them, and then presents them for the purpose of study, a directional study. So that's Veda Vyasa. So is it a position? Some people say, yes, it's a position. Some people say it is one individual. But Puranic literature states that there are a lot of Vyasas. For example, the Mahabharata's character Drauni, Ashwatthama, will become Vyasa in the next Manvantara, a Puranic calculation of time. So it's every Manvantara will have difference of Vyasas. Now this Vyasa, the one who is in this Manvantara, is this Dwapara Yuga, is none other than Vishnu himself, who has incarnated as Vyasa. So this is Vishnu himself, because there is a phrase, Kohyanya Pundarikakshat Mahabharata Krit Bhavet. Who else other than Vishnu himself can write Mahabharata, a story of himself? Now we will get into see what is Mahabharata. Okay. Why? Is it a story of Pundarikaksha, Krishna, Vishnu, or not? If so, is it Vedavyasa glorifying himself, that he is speaking about himself? Is it so? That's very interesting, these things to observe, but that will deviate a lot from the main topic that I wanted to speak. Now, what is Mahabharata? It speaks about everything, is it so? So, actually, the extension of Mahabharata in Adiparva is told in the Mahabharata itself. The text body itself says that it was initially Jaya of a small size. It became Bharata and it became Mahabharata of 100,000 verses. Now, in one of these verses, there is one phrase which has been, which is a little strikingly maybe weird. That Vedavyasa says, where does this Mahabharata actually start and what does it convey? He has already told Dharmecha, Arthecha, Kamecha, Mokshecha. They are the topics. What it covers is where does it start? Manvadi Kechit Bhruvate. It starts from the story of Manu, Swayambhuva Manu. Astikadi Tatapare. It starts from the story of Astika Rishi, the one in Indian religious practices or cultural practices. So when if they encounter a snake or a serpent, they say, you remember Astika Rishi, sage, so that the serpent will run away, because Janamejayasya Yajnante Astika Vachanam Smara Sarpa Gacha Sarpa Mahavisha. So people converse to the Sarpa, the snake, the serpent, looking at it. Remember Astika, what he did for you. He saved your life. So you should not bite me. So this is a belief. So that's the person Astika. Is it the story of him? So Mahabharata starts from Astika stories. That means the end of Janamejaya's story. So does it start from there? So some people say, Vedavyasa says, the one who wrote Mahabharata, the author of the Mahabharata, says it is from Astika story. Tato Parichara Dhyanye. Uparichara Vasu. Uparichara Vasu had two children. One is Satyavati or Matsyagandha, who is the stepmother of Bhishma, wife of Shantanu. So from her father's story. And Satyavati, Uparichara Vasu's daughter, her son is Vedavyasa, the author of Mahabharata. And Uparichara Vasu's another son is Virata. The Virata kingdom is somewhere between the Malwa region, the Rajasthan, somewhere around that, very close to Delhi, Indraprastha, and very close to Hastinapura. So where Pandavas lived, Ajñatavasa, Virata Parva. A book is dedicated to Virata out of the 18 sections. So Virata, Uparichara Vasu's son. And so you can see the connections of maybe familial connections or political connections, that if you see the whole Mahabharata narrative. And some people say, but actually it sounds weird, because Vedavyasa himself is confused where Mahabharata starts. The author himself is confused. So Mahabharata has had a number of commentaries and translations and interpretations and retellings or adaptations or recreations. The first recreation being Pilal's in the 19th century, early 19th century. Transcreation or recreation. So he used the word transcreation, Pilal. Now Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya, written in the 13th century by Ananda Tirtha or Acharya Madhva, a proponent of Tattvavada tradition or a proponent of Dvaita Vedanta tradition, the founder of Dvaita philosophy. It happens, his birthplace happens to be Udupi, nearby Udupi, a very beautiful hamlet. If you come to Manipal, it's a very beautiful place. It has 30,000 students and 30 institutions. And if you go to the end of Manipal, Manipal is a hillock. So if you go to the end of Manipal, you can see the Western Ghats, a stretch of Western Ghats to the east and a stretch of Arabian Sea to the left in the horizons. In your right and left horizons, you can see that both of them so beautifully located. So you can understand where Udupi, Madhvacharya's birthplace and all are located. If you really want to, I assume that many of you are from Delhi. So if you really want to come to have a natural retreat, maybe Manipal is a destination. So Madhvacharya's birthplace is Manipal. So Manipal University had decided to establish a Dvaita Philosophy Resource Center when they had received a funding from the European Union. So Europe had funded for an Indian Philosophy Center at Manipal. It's a fascinating story. Mahabharata, Madhvacharya or Ananda Tirtha had written Mahabharata Tatparya, which happens to be the very first commentary on Mahabharata as documented in 13th century. Nilakanta's Bhavadipa is around 15th, 16th century, so it's little advanced. It's a 32 chapter and 5,000 plus verses that are there in Mahabharata Tatparya. In that he says, this actually means, it is not this verse Manvadi Kechit Brahate is not that he's confused about what is Mahabharata. It's about actually Manvadi, means it's a psychological story. Astikadi Tatapare, it's a story of Astikas. Astikas are those who believe in God or those who believe in Veda as testimonial. Vedas are Pramana. It's a story of the people who are religious or spiritually oriented. It's a spiritual story. Or it's a story of believers. Or more than that, here actually Astika is particularly referring to Pandavas. So it's a story of Pandavas. It's a historical story of Pandavas. Uparicharadhyanye, Uparichara. Upari means yubo, upper, upper, upari, up. Uparichara, the one who goes around, the one who's above all of us, the Supreme Being. So it's a story of Vishnu or the Supreme Being, whoever is the Supreme Being, but at least, in the case of Mahabharata, undoubtedly it's Vishnu. So it's a story, a spiritual story of Mahabharata. That's why we can see Bhagavad Gita, we can see Vishnu Sahasranama, and a lot of such references and evidences in Mahabharata text within stretch itself. And also he happens to be one of the important characters of Mahabharata. So it's a story of Vishnu. So it's a psychological story, Manvadi. It's a story, historical story of Astikas, those who believe in God, or the ones who are really believing in Krishna as God, Pandavas, and Uparichara. The story of it's a spiritual metaphysics. Now here, what aspect is very interesting for us is really Mahabharata happened, when it happened? So if we look at so Mahabharata, it says Samarabdam Kaliyugam Yada Duryodhano Patat. So the moment Duryodhana fell down, that is the time when Mahabharata actually happened. Kali Yuga started. So after Kali Yuga, we are in 5,000 years have passed by, 2,000 or 3,000 years before Christ and 2,000 years after Christ. So approximately 5,000 plus years. But according to the scholars, it's somewhere around 3,500 years, according to the Western and Eastern. Almost all scholars, somewhere they debate around 3,000 to 5,000 years of stretch. But it became as a text over centuries or over millennia. And the oldest Mahabharata manuscript that is available is of the 4th century Common Era. So that's the oldest Mahabharata text in the manuscript form that's available to us. Because beyond that, looking from the orthographic and paleographic point of view, we do not know what kind of documents or scripts did existed, even though we know what all scripts, in terms of history of scripts, we know what all scripts existed, but how such a big text was printed or penned down in that manner. So Mahabharata happens to be orature, oral literature for all of us. Now, why Mahabharata is because of this very interesting aspect that it speaks not merely the stories of Pandavas. The concern is not merely the stories of Pandavas. If you look at the way Mahabharata is structured, the 18 books, Sabha Parva, Vana Parva, Adi Parva, all of them, if you look at them, the way they are structured. So if you look at Adi Parva, by the time it is over, their Pandavas were around 15 to 20 years old, or somewhere around that time, or a little older. By the time Sabha Parva comes, they are 20s, in the middle of the 20s or end of the 20s. And then by the time Sabha Parva gets over, they are almost in their 55. And by the time Vana Parva comes, no, they are almost in their nearly 60s. By the time Vana Parva is about their 60s. Virata Parva is a story of 1 year. They are around somewhere in their 58 and 59. Pandavas, in the sense, I'm taking Yudhishthira as a representative. And Udyoga Parva is just 1 month story. Bhishma Parva is just 10 days story. Drona Parva is just 4 days stories, but Drona Parva is really big. So Mahabharata is not something like a memoir or a diary. It's just the same applies to Ramayana also, because within 6 khandas, I just have 20 minutes. The same happens with Ramayana also, because by the time 6 khandas are over, Rama is only around 30 years old. Similarly, Mahabharata also has this, it's not document important aspects. Am I there? Because it says your internet connection is unstable. Okay.
You're there. You're there.
So what all happens, because the focus is on psychology, in the sense human psyche. Each character that are there in Mahabharata, they represent a human character. So it's a idea of moral, what we are, what we should do. For example, if we take Karna as a representation of friendship, he is an interesting character because he is a friend, his true loyal friend, but infused with a lot of ego. Okay, so how a friend infused with ego would behave, or how a friend, a loyal, would behave. Now this actually gives us a lot of scope for digital humanities. So what is that? What is humanities? First of all, humanities is a study of humans, their life, their behavior, particularly their experience. So all the humanities discipline is mostly, as the post-Kantian scholars believe, it's very ideographic in its nature compared to social sciences, which are nomothetic in nature, because they look at generalized laws in understanding the society. So social science deals with the societal systems, social structures. So their research method and research approach is totally different from humanities. Whereas humanities looks at particularly experience. When we say experience, Mahabharata and Madhvacharya, if I want to connect it, even though it's trivial, according to Madhvacharya, what is moksha? If Mahabharata is speaking of moksha, what is moksha? So Madhvacharya says, mukti, not Madhvacharya, this is not the word of Madhvacharya, it's the traditional, the Dvaita tradition says, muktihi naija sukhanubhutihi. You experience yourself. Yourself means you're nothing but just form of consciousness. You're nothing but just form of tattvamasi. You're nothing but just form of consciousness. You're nothing but just form of bliss. So you experience yourself. Naija sukhanubhutihi. You experience yourself. How can I So I'm experiencing what? I'm experiencing, according to them, the world is real. So I'm experiencing the real world, which is his creation. Now I'm experiencing the world. So am I experiencing objectively? No. According to them, subjective experience of objective reality is moksha. I can't become suddenly, I can't jump into someone's shoe and then look into the world. I look at the world as the way I can, the way I am. They speak of yogyata, taratamya, and so on. So the subjective experience is very important, which is the primary concern of humanities. Now, if I want to connect these philosophical ideas that are prevalent in all these schools of thought, not just Dvaita Vedanta, any other Vedanta school for that matter. Unfortunately, what we are doing is that the moment we use the word Vedanta, we directly connect it to Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta, which is not wrong. But it is in the sense of subaltern, minority. Other Vedanta traditions are left out. So we can't generalize all Vedanta to Shankaracharya's Vedanta, because even in Advaita there are a lot of variations. Okay, whether it is epistemology or whether it is ontology, there are a lot of variations. Whether it is Bhaskaracharya or Yadava Prakasha or Vallabhacharya or Nimbarka or others. Now it happens to be a very interesting one. The according to the schedule that was a list that was sent to me, my lecture I think is 22nd. If it is so, it's a very interesting number. Like Mahabharata has 18 everywhere. Like a regional scholar who happens to be Padma Shri awardee, Bananjay Govindacharya, he says 18 is a very important number in Mahabharata tradition, and then he delivers a long lecture on that, on this number of 18. Similarly, 22nd also happens to be a significant number, because that is the 22nd Vedanta tradition. The tradition that I am trained in, I belong to, Ananda Tirthas or Madhvacharyas, he is the 22nd commentator on Vedanta tradition. So in that sense, it's a very interesting number. So if I want to connect all these Vedanta to Mahabharata, it's not manually possible. It takes a lot of effort. This is where digital humanities comes into picture. Whether the applications such as text mining or data mining or topic modeling, these help us to, topic modeling is a very interesting one, highly widely used in Google and other search engine optimization and other interfaces. It's the moment we are searching for dog in Facebook and all, what happens is that it looks at what all topics that are related to dog, like for example barking, for example making cute faces. So they connect it to all that is related to one entity, ontological entity. So similarly, if we are able to make these kind of approaches, particularly for example data mining is a misnomer, because it really misinterprets that we are really mining the data. We are actually not mining the data. We are mining the patterns of the data. So if we are looking at the data that is present in the whole Mahabharata, and then if there is a technological tool that helps us the moment that data comes, what all people, researcher wants, that kind of tool has to be created. So it's basically a pattern search. We at Manipal, what we are engaging into is that we actually started with contextual tagging, and we had an event in 2017 January, one workshop. We hosted a lot of people who have worked in digital humanities and Sanskrit computational linguistics, and they suggested, if you want to take up contextual tagging with Bharata, we said boring. If it is boring, why boring? What about others? What are the others? Which Mahabharata? So the others I would like to read out is that the Bori came in actually in 1927 to 1965. It was actually first printed in Lahore, Pakistan. It was published by Pune, but the printer was in Pakistan, Lahore, because it was part of India. I think something has happened. I hope, I'm sorry for that, the technical glitch. So Bori actually was published in 1927 to 1965. Then meanwhile, Shastri Vavilla, the one Professor Bala Ganapati had mentioned, came in 1932. The Gita Press Gorakhpur one is the popular one. And Kumbakonam was one that was worked out in 1914 to 1918. Actually, even before Kumbakonam, there was another southern recension of Vani Vilas Press in Srirangam. So there have been 3 popular southern recensions, and there have been a lot of recensions in other languages. I'll get back to get into what is recension really means. So there is Asiatic Society that brought out 1834 to 1839, and again one more in 1863. Bombay edited and published Nilakanta in 1863. Madras, other than Shastri Vavilla, there was one more in 1890. Shastri Vavilla is from 1932. Chaukamba published Nilakantas after Bombay published Nilakanta in 1863. Chaukamba published Nilakanta in 1988. The most popular recensions are Kumbakonam, Bori, Shastri Vavilla, Gita Press. Gita Press is very popular because it has been brought out into multiples of Indian languages, primarily Hindi and some English. And so people read it, it's very easy to read, voluminous. But Kumbakonam, Bori and Shastri Vavilla are highly cited scholarly versions. Bori is considered by many of the traditional scholars as a northern Indian recension. Even the critical recension, even though it provides almost all differences, textual variations of the text, but most of them are provided as footnotes or not as main text. So what Bori does actually is that, according to Bori, the size of Mahabharata is only 74,000 verses, 73,805 verses. Whereas according to Kumbakonam and Shastri Vavilla, the Mahabharata size is somewhere around 93 to 96,000 verses. Kumbakonam calculates more. So Shastri Vavilla and Kumbakonam says it's almost 93 to 96,000. According to Bori, the philologist who ventured into critical editing of Mahabharata, they said only 73,000 verses is original Mahabharata. And even in that, Vedavyasa, what he has written, maybe not all of them. Okay, many of them are not really Mahabharata. So southern scholars felt, according to the tradition, according to Vedavyasa, Mahabharata is Laksha Shlokatmaka, 1,100,000 couplets, verses. Where are they missing? How come 25,000 is missing? So they, meanwhile, in the early 20th century itself, they brought out other 2 recensions, and they are even studied by scholars. There are a lot of differences. I don't have that amount of time to display those differences and so on. I just have 9 more minutes. I have to wind up. Let me show what we have done. When we took up this task, we first took 2018, one whole year. I had a team led by Dr. Arjuna, my colleague and friend. One whole year, he led this whole project, and he brought out Bori recension. Initially, the Bori printed version, which took 50 years for them to publish the critical edition of 19 volumes, each of this size. It was led by 3 people, and the primary leader was Suktankar. Later, it was first digitized by Professor Muneo Tokunaga of Kyoto, Japan. And he digitized it, and there were a lot of problems because he did it single-handedly with a couple of people helping him out. Later, John Dargavale Smith, or John D. Smith of US, did it. He further brought out the digital version, and it's available in Bombay Indology website, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, that is brought out by Bori. These 2 Boris are different. One is Baroda Oriental Research Institute, and another one is Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, Pune. So that is available there in Bombay Indology website. He brought out, he interestingly added certain markers that are helpful for us to identify the text. Okay, if we are using programs, so we can directly jump to that part. The search becomes very easier. So I'm speaking of late 20th century or the second half, early second half of 20th century venture. Then what we did here collectively, we looked into John Smith's versions, as there were certain concerns that could not be addressed by Tokunaga's effort, that was addressed by Smith's effort. We identified that still there were a lot of concerns that have to be addressed, so we edited it. So we refined it. I wouldn't say there were mistakes, I would say we refined it further for the help of technology. And we took 17 was Bori, 2018 we took Kumbakonam, 2019 one Mata, Kukke Subramanya Mata. Kukke Subramanya is another very famous place for many people who believe in, who worship Kukke Subramanya. It's a very famous place. There was another research center, Vedavyasa Samshodhana Kendra. They funded some part of it to make the project complete, the digital concordance to be complete. So they said, please edit. Don't stop it to just Bori and Kumbakonam. Also edit Shastri Vavilla. The another one from, why Shastri Vavilla? Kukke Subramanya Mata also belongs to Dvaita tradition. It is very important because Shastri Vavilla tradition, even though it is brought out by an Advaitin scholar and from Chennai, but it resembles a lot of textual similarities with the Mahabharata manuscript that is available in Udupi region, in Udupi Krishnamata. So you look at the way I am unable to speak on how Mahabharata manuscripts have been composed and what time, what all the textual variations and so on. But the one that was brought out in the mid 20th century and the one that is not yet, the Palimara Mata has done its effort by bringing out the manuscripts that are available in Udupi Krishnamata and around regions. They have compiled, collated all these manuscripts. Still, there are a lot of manuscripts of Mahabharata that are still to be worked upon. It's a complete project. Many of these manuscripts are available in many of the US and German universities such as Braun and so on. So Suktankar had a long team that went around the world, collected more than 2,000 manuscripts and brought out one edition of 73,000 verses. Another, but these people, Bori was an institute, so it had support. But these two individuals, that is P.R. Krishnacharya and Shastri, they did not have any kind of such support. They just, P.R. Krishnacharya and his brother T.R. Vyasacharya in the early 20th century, when you can understand what was the economic and transportation situations then, still they managed to compile a lot of manuscripts and critically edit them and bring out these versions. So that is why it's the pain for the southern traditional scholar why these are left out. And Shastri Vavilla also similar. Actually, T.R. Krishnacharya's recension is very close to, he is a Madhva, but his recensions are not very close to Udupi text. It's very close to the whole East Coast. But there is a lot of historical reasons and geographical reasons if you look at the similarities of these texts and all. So it can be a lecture by itself. The text can be lectures by themselves. What we did, we compiled all of them. Now I'll show you how it looks. I hope it works. So yeah, I think I have to share the screen. Here. Share the screen. So this website is mahabharata.manipal.edu. If one is interested to conduct a textual variation study, they may look into it. Actually, one paper was published by my another colleague, Dr. Ananda Tirtha Upadhyaya. He had conducted a manual study without any technological support. He had conducted a manual study on Sabha Parva by looking at how textual variations could be very interesting. I wanted to bring that aspect, but unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to maybe. So, okay, if you I have reached 42 minutes. So if you go here and if you look into this Mahabharata concordance, if you select this, you will get this window where it shows. I'm unable to show it right now because maybe there is a technical glitch from my end. You can see the differences. There are character variations, there are word variations, there are line variations, there are chapter variations, not in just in number. Somewhere in one recension, critical recension edition, one verse chapter is somewhere appears somewhere else. Some appears earlier, some appears later. These all would probe for us into very interesting study. For example, one I would like to cite the one popularly referred to instance from Suktankar's edition. So in Suktankar's edition, it's told that there is a lot of praise of Krishna during Draupadi's Vastrapaharana time. So it has been discussed that it is irrelevant because the way the structure is, it's too religious in nature. So that has been considered as extra interpolated text and it has been removed. What happens later when you read Suktankar's Bodhi edition, later there is a phrase that it says, as praised, so far as praised, Krishna was praised. So the praise part is completely the eulogy of Krishna. Eulogy has multiples of meaning, it's polysemous word. That part is completely missing. Now this creates a lot of confusion. And for example, another textual variation, what Madhvacharya has pointed out, according to northern Indian recensions, the manuscripts that are available in northern India, what happened in the 14th day of the battle was 14th or 13th day of battle. What happened was Chakravyuha, where Abhimanyu alone knew how to enter and could not come out, and then he was killed unethically. Whereas the southern recensions say it is Padmavyuha and not Chakravyuha. So this is the difference. The whole formation of the battle is completely changed. The dynamics of the war narrative is changed. And Madhvacharya in 13th century, he also says the same. It's Padmavyuha and not Chakravyuha. Now, there are a lot of such interesting insights. And even if you take, this is one aspect of it, if what is the purpose of a digital concordance to study Mahabharata, there are certain approaches. The one, it's created by Purna Prajna Vidyapita scholar, which is also adopted by Manipal University. We conduct a course on textual Sanskrit where it's at the end of the course, you will be able to read Sanskrit text on your own, but it happens gradually. It doesn't happen at the end of one course, but there are a lot of such techniques, pedagogy that exists. So the one who wants to study the textual variations may use such opportunities and get directly into the text and enjoy the text more than the narratives or interpretations. They are also fascinating. Now, this creates which one is real Mahabharata. So Madhvacharya says, which one is Mahabharata? So he says in his second chapter in Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya, he says, Kvachit grantan prakshipanti, kvachid antaritanapi, kuryuhu kvachitcha vityasam, pramadat kvachidanyata. There are intentional errors and unintentional errors for an editor when they are compiling the text. For some people, oh, this part looks so beautiful. Let me also insert my part into this. Kvachit grantan prakshipanti. So some people want their own contribution in the name of Vedavyasa. He is speaking in 13th century and we are in 21st century. So imagine what has happened to Mahabharata later. Kvachit grantan prakshipanti, kvachit antaritanapi. They say, hey, what Vedavyasa is speaking? Doesn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense to me. So they just take it out. Or they intentionally do it. It's against my philosophical premise. How can it be in Mahabharata? It's going to contradict my philosophical worldview. Let me delete it. Kvachid antaritanapi, kuryuk kvachitcha vatyasam. They will think, oh, can I have a play in Vedavyasa's words? See, Sanskrit is after all a language. Any language, you can create a lot of stuff in the language. So even you can create Sanskrit. So people who compose of very advanced poetries are possible. And Sanskrit has certain interesting features that you can play off. So They say, okay, let me just add my own part. Kuryu kochitcha vityasam. But sometimes what happens, pramadat kochidanyata, unintentional errors. People do not know what they are dealing with. Because it's script variations, I may not have learned all the scripts, maybe 4, 5. So how many scripts, how many manuscripts, and I might have limited resources. For example, imagine all these people who have edited Mahabharata, they might have had very limited resources, limited economic support, and they have to do this huge tedious task like we did in Manipal. So what happens is at the end of the day, unintentionally there are some mistakes and it becomes published in the name of Mahabharata. And there are a lot of such hilarious things in Mahabharata. If you read the Mahabharata, that's published by almost all the critical recensions. So Madhvacharya speaks about this in 13th century itself. He has identified these kind of problems do exist. And he says, Mahabharata, as he pointed out earlier, he says it's not just merely 3 interpretations that you can provide for Mahabharata, that is psychological, historical, and spiritual. You can provide more than that, 10 meanings that you can say. For us, it's very difficult to extract one meaning out of the literary discourse. 10 meanings will be an ambitious task. So, in that sense, the phrase goes that everything exists in Mahabharata. You can look into ethical discourses. For example, we started an approach called Ethics and Epics, discourses on Indian morality. So we earlier started teaching engineering students, MIT engineering students, Manipal engineering students, a crash course in making them to look into the normative ethical discourses that are available in Ramayana and Mahabharata, or meta-ethical not much, but normative ethics and applied ethics, how they can apply it to their field when it comes to certain aspects of personal and professional values or behaviors, how they can look into those ideas, whether it's about friendship or any other such topic. We have also made it a little elaborate, very specialized, and now another faculty colleague, Tanima Nigam, is conducting a course on that, ethics and epics, looking from a comparative standpoint. Now, these are the course, these are all things that we can really do with Mahabharata. I mean, maybe it's happening in Manipal at a very small scale, but all of us, if we build a big research team, we can bring a lot of things. For example, I'll tell one example, and if my time is over, I'll wind it up here. This topic that I wanted to share itself is 1 hour topic, so I tried my best to precisely present.
Dr. Srinivas, you can take a little more time, it's fine.
Okay. So in Bhagavad Gita, what happens, see, there are 18 chapters. Mahabharata has 18 parvas. The battle was fought for 18 days, and there are 18 Akshohini army, and Bhagavad Gita has 18 adhyayas. 18 is a very interesting number when it comes to Mahabharata and Upanishads. So in the very first chapter, Arjuna Vishada Yoga, so it is also Arjuna Vishada Yoga, it is also Duryodhana Vishada Yoga, because the very first verses is about the Duryodhana psyche. When we are seeing psychological story, it's about Duryodhana psyche. He's a warrior, he's a prince. Actually, in Vedavyasa, in Mahabharata, he says, Raja Vachanam Abravit. He's almost like a Raja. He behaves as if he is a king, even though his father still is on the throne. Raja Vachanam Abravit. He is the king. These words, if we use word analysis or centi-word analysis, say WordNet or centi-WordNet, a digital humanistic tool, we can look in text and find out what is the value of the word. Is it sarcastic? Is it comical? What is the value of that particular data that is present there in Mahabharata? This part, the first 10 verses of Bhagavad Gita, is a classical example for this advanced study. If we use such, it requires a lot of hermeneutic interpretations, and Mahabharata has a lot that kind of tool, because Vedavyasa is little packed person, is very pregnant with his lot of techniques. That's why he said Vyasotishtam Jagat Sarvam. So he says, see, Pandavas have 11 Akshohini army, Pandavas have 7 Akshohini army, Kauravas have 11 Akshohini army. Duryodhana looks at them and says, I see 11 army leaders in their side. Who are they? Yudhana, Satyaki, Virata, Drupada, 3. Yudhamanyuscha Vikrantaha, Uttamoja, Yudhano Viratascha, Drupadascha Maharataha, Shaibya, Drishtaketushchekitanah, Kashirajascha Viryavan, Purujit Kuntibojascha, Shaibyascha Narapungavaha, Yudhamanyuscha Vikrantaha, Uttamojascha Viryavan, Saubhadro, Draupadeyascha, Sarve Eva Maharata. All of them are 11 people. Yudham, Satyaki, Virata, Drupada, Shishupala's son, Drishtaketu, Kashiraja, that is Bhima's father-in-law, another wife, Kuntiboja, Purujit, Shaibya, the father of the son who was killed by Bhima in the Vanaparva, Yudhamanyu, Uttamoja, Saubhadra, Draupadeya. Draupadeya are 5 people, but yes, he takes them comprehensively as one unit. 11 people, he looks at them and says, then he says, I have 7 people in my team. Actually, there were a lot of people, but he only takes them. Bhavan, Drona, 2. Drona he tells, Bhavan, you, Bhishma, Bhavan, Bhishmascha Karna, Kripa, Ashwatthama, Vikaranascha, Saumadatti. So he says 7 people in his team. Why this? Is basically because look at Duryodhana's psyche. Later he says, Apariyaptam tadasmakam balam bhishma bhirakshitam. Paryaptam chidametesham balam bhima bhirakshitam. Apariyaptam, unsaturated it looks. The team that is protected by Bhishma. Our team looks unsaturated. Paryaptam chidametesham balam bhima bhirakshitam. But the team that is protected by Bhima, actually it is protected by Drishtadyumna. He is the commander-in-chief, Draupadi's brother. But he looks at he says Bhima, his opponent, his primary rival is Bhima. He says it looks saturated. Most of the commentators on Bhagavad Gita has left the first chapter not that much commented upon. But these contain a lot of significant values if one is interested in the narration itself, the study of the narration itself, the narratological study of Mahabharata, the human psyche, how it has been explored. For that, and even see actually what happens, 10 Anika makes 1 Akshohini. Okay, so it starts from Patti and then it goes till Akshohini, the way the army composition is composed. Just looking at Drishtva Pandavanikam Vyudam Duryodhanastada. Just looking at 1 Anika, 1/10 of 1 Akshohini. There are 7 Akshohini. We understand. Actually, there's also a problem with the visual media, the way they project the Mahabharata battle. It's very hilarious. The way one stands doing and then shoots something and then it goes and exactly meets at one particular point as if they know the GPS location very well. The way there are certain visual elements that are for different purposes, but we should not take them literal, verbatim. That's how Vedavyasa has told. Yes, Mahabharata, if we read Vedavyasa's Mahabharata, it's really, really fascinating. And some of them have really done a good job. I also appreciate Rajaji, C. Rajagopalaji, the first Governor General of India, and R.K. Narayan, and many other such people in different languages, in Kannada and Tamil. Many of them have done wonderful job interpreting Mahabharata. But visual media has somewhere, they have tried their best to communicate certain things with all the limitations that they have had, technological limitations. If you look at just 1 Anika, it's not all of them gathered on one day. It's like they have military troops, they have paramilitary troops. It's 5 million people almost who gathered in that battlefield. 18 Akshohini means half of Bangalore population. And 18 million people, just 1 Akshohini out of 7, that is opponents. And out of them, 1/10 of Drishtva Pandava Nikam, only one Anika Duryodhana saw. He is nervous and he says, their looks saturated, ours look unsaturated. These are all very interesting, that here nowhere Vedavyasa gives any kind of interpretation why Duryodhana is taking these 11 people's name. Why only 7 people, and why this particular 7 people? For this, we need certain approaches such as contextual tagging or subject indexing, looking at that could connect wherever that individual's name has come to the storyline. Okay, so it helps us to analyze, because if you look at, I'll take only one name, is for example, Satyaki. Satyaki is Krishna's friend from Yadava army. If Balarama was present in the Mahabharata battle, Krishna wouldn't have fought. Balarama wouldn't have let this Yadavas fight for Satyaki and all fight for Pandavas. So Satyaki should have been in my side. This is actually Bananji Govindacharya's interpretation. It's very interesting interpretation. So Satyaki should have been on my side, but he's on the opponent's side. Drupada along with Jarasandha fought against Krishna. Now he's on the opponent's side. If earlier Jarasandha was alive, Drupada would have been on my side. Drupada's son, Uttamojas, Yudamanyu would have been on my side. Everyone would have been, if that Draupadi did not get married to Pandavas, these people wouldn't have gone on the opponent, even if the battle was inevitable. I don't have time a lot because there is a lot to discuss. Battle was inevitable. So he says, all these people would have fought for me, but unfortunately they are fighting on the opponent's side. That is why just looking at, even though it's just 7 Akshohini, and that day only one Anika has been there, he looks at them and says, my team looks unsaturated, even though his time is big. So using digital humanities tools, we can really explore. I wanted to display the work that we have done, but I suggest that you may, the work at this point of time, it doesn't have any translation support. So it is purely that there are a lot of, even when we are speaking about digital humanities, encoding and scripting is one primary concern when we are dealing with Sanskrit literature, Indian languages particularly. So encoding from one script to another script, because all of us may not know multiples of script, particularly Devanagari need not be known by everyone. So at this point of time, the computer works only on Devanagari method. But if you search for works that are being done on Mahabharata, and the digital tools that are available on Mahabharata are a lot. Unfortunately, because there is no mapping that is available for the English literature or the literature that are available in English, including the Western philosophical, Western literature or Western religious texts, the way, even for the Korean, Japanese and Chinese, Mandarin, the way the technology has been sophisticated, it's not been the case for the Indian language. That is why we are unable to, still Mahabharata remains unexplored, the majority part of it, and explored in silos. Now, this is upon us, the 21st century generation. Even though one may believe in Mahabharata, one may not believe in Mahabharata, it doesn't matter what we believe in. It's not everyone believes in Homer's work. It's not everyone believes in Plato or Socratic philosophers or even modern philosophers, because we live in contemporary era. But even though people like Darwin, René Descartes, Immanuel Kant had very different opinion when it comes to animals and women and so on, but because they had some different kinds of opinion about certain things, we do not discard them. Okay, I would like to cite Sir Thomas Woodrow, who said that it's not Indian civilization is that, like, all of them are that meaningless, that they have composed, that is totally, absolutely senseless. No. So there will be a lot of things. Only the thing is that we need that kind of technological tool, and it is available. It is upon us that we have to invest, work very hard to bring that sophisticated thought process to make Mahabharata look even more richer. And I hope I was able to do justice to the topic within whatever approach that I could take. And thank you. I was so confused that what to speak and what not to speak. So I wrote a lot of topic, but today I couldn't do that. But thank you for this opportunity, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Dr. Srinivasa. Well, I would like to conclude by saying that it has been translated as that if a person awakes in the morning and reads the Bharata, which is like the Savitri, he obtains the fruit of reading the Bharata and obtains the supreme Brahman. The illustrious ocean and the Himalaya mountains are stores of riches. And that's what the Bharata is like. I think we are all making an effort every Saturday to read the text through the various versions and the ideas of our esteemed scholars. I'm really thankful to Dr. Srinivasa, who had to just move out because of certain emergency. But that includes the Department of Philosophy, the Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi. We are thankful to him for sparing time for all of us. We are very thankful to all our participants who are regularly attending these webinars. For 2 weeks, we did take a break, but now on, we will be very regular. Thank you to all for being with us and looking forward to having you again on the coming Saturday. That is where we are going to be having a very esteemed scholar joining us. And please spare and block your next Saturday. It would be in the evening because our scholar is from US. Thank you and namaskar.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Gitesh.
Thank you, Professor Bala.